Are you an exercise coach or on your own wellness journey? You're in the right place. 7 Movements presents. Welcome to the Ask Sinner Show with your hosts, Dan Tatton and John Sinclair.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 7 of the Ask Sinner Show. John and I teamed up to wear the same shirt today for all your viewing pleasure.
I wear it better.
Comment in the comments of who wore it better. John, we're going to reformat a little bit what the Ask Sinner Show does. So each show is actually just going to contain one question now. So help you get a little more in depth, and hopefully people like that. So let's jump into your first question here. So hi, John. How do I know I'm ready to take on high intensity training? From Jamie.
Got it. So the first thing we would have to define is what is high intensity training, and how do we define different types of high intensity training. The popular trend right now is high intensity interval training. And high intensity interval training is usually we do a period of exercise that's going to be, we're going to work really hard by either lifting weights. Usually the heavier the weights you lift, the higher your heart rate goes up, therefore your intensity is higher, and or you're moving those weights faster. And or you're not using weights, you're just moving faster. So, or moving at a big distance in a very short period of time. So as we exercise at a higher rate of heart rate, we would classify that as being a higher intensity. High intensity interval means we have to have a period of recovery. And to have true interval recovery, we need to be able to get into where your heart rate comes down fairly close to around 60 to 65% of your maximal training heart rate. So it doesn't mean you're coming back to full rest. It just means that you're dropping down, making sure that you can breathe, you feel ready to do your next set, and then away you go again. High intensity steady state training is where you're going to get your heart rate up really, really high, and then you got to try to keep it high for that long, for an extended period of time. Generally, most people have, even really fit folks, usually have about 15 to 20 minutes of total energy that they can use at those high levels. The more elite level fitness that you have, the longer you can sustain that. So now the question really becomes, how do I know I'm ready to be able to do that? So for example, I've got a client that I work with where we have, she's had a heart condition, and we want to be able to get her to the point where she can finally do some high intensity activity. The only challenge is that by getting their heart rate up too quickly and not doing it over a progressive fashion, that's not going to make them feel very good, right? And so our goal in terms of trying to make someone healthy and happy and fit is we have to do this over time. So the question, if Jamie, and it's hard to know without really knowing this person and seeing them, the real challenge is try to get your heart rate up to a point where you're at about an 8 out of 10 out of your perceived exertion. So if you don't know what that is and you've never trained with a heart rate monitor before, I suggest everyone should be training with a heart rate monitor because that's the only true indication of what your actual intensity is. But if you don't have that, we can use the rate of perceived exertion scale, which is if I'm at about an 8 out of 10, I should be at that level where we would be considered high intensity. And so if we're going to do high intensity interval training, we would probably, if I was taking you through one, I would maybe have you do anywhere from 5 to 10 sets of any particular exercise at first, getting you to bring your heart rate up, and then seeing how long it takes for your heart rate to come back down. So we call that heart rate recovery. If your heart rate recovery goes down, when we graph it on a heart rate monitor, you'll see that if your heart rate goes like this and it takes a long time to come down, like a nice easy ski slope, then we know that we have to shorten the amount of time that you're doing that exercise. But then we also need to make sure that we give you adequate rest between those bouts of higher intensity efforts. So the goal would be we bring your heart rate up, and then eventually you're going to have a steep slope coming down. And that means your heart is recovering faster and faster, which means you're becoming more and more cardiovascularly fit. And so when we become more cardiovascular fit, you're going to have sharper peaks as opposed to long peaks. So I would suggest we do a few efforts, see how long the time it takes for that to come down. And then as those start to get a little bit sharper, that's the nice part about the heart rate monitor. It helps you manage what that looks like because you get a visual representation of it. Then now we know we can start adding more bouts of intervals and or steady state activity down the road. But we'll always start with high intensity interval first. And then as you become more fit, we'll slowly start drip feeding that high intensity steady state exercise at most 1 time a week.
Very cool. And do you see any sort of individual variances with people you're working with as far as kind of seeing, you talk about that long slope on the back end from someone being fit for their own, in their own right to kind of the next person who also might be fit? Do you see any variance in that, or is it pretty clear, like as far as the sort of degree of slope that you're seeing from an individual?
The picture might look similar, but what will happen is the actual raw number is the thing that changes, because it's always based on a percentage of their heart rate, which takes into account their fitness level, their age, and their resting heart rate. So those numbers might look a little off, but the picture looks fairly similar. So if you were to plot my client's data with my data, they might look very similar, but the numbers that represent those might be a little different. But there's always variance that goes on with individuals for sure. And even within the same sport, within the same age, and that's what's kind of cool about it. In fact, when we look at variances, we don't think of that as a bad thing. In fact, heart rate variability is a key metric to health. And that doesn't really apply specifically to the programming of what we're talking about. Just know that it's important that your heart is not to have the same consistent cadence, right, and rhythm. It should be variable. And as soon as your heart rate gets really consistent, then that's a cause for concern. So when you go get an electrocardiogram done, that's what they'll be looking at is there variance in there, or is it this really rhythmical and sustained? So variability, again, a key to everything that we've always talked about, and now they understand that heart rate variability is very crucial.
Very cool. Any heart rate monitors you recommend? What do you use when you're working out?
I use the Polar. It's the H7. It's a Bluetooth chest strap, and the Bluetooth chest strap, so you put it around your chest, and then Polar actually has a app on your phone, and then it goes directly to your phone. So instead of having to have a watch with you, that works really good. And so it's a cheap way of doing it. It's only I think on Amazon, they're like $47. You can get them at Best Buy for like, I think around $50. Sport Check, I know they carry them in Canada. Dick's, I know, carries them here in the US. So you put that on, connect it to your phone. It'll measure your resting heart rate. It'll measure your maximal heart rate. You'll start to test that out as what your max heart rate is, and then you set all your activities in there. So just like we have our at play module, all the things that are in that at play module you'll see right in the phone. You just select what sport you're doing, and it'll track what you've done in your particular activity.
Awesome. Thanks, John. Question of the day. What do you got for us?
Have you ever used a heart rate monitor? And if so, what activities do you use your heart rate monitor for?
Very good. All right, that's episode 7. Thanks, John.
You bet. You guys.
Thanks so much for listening to 7 Movements Presents The Ask Sinner Show with your hosts, Dan Tatton and John Sinclair. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit 7movements.com and on Twitter and Facebook at 7Movements. We'll catch you next time on The Ask Sinner Show.